Greetings, ladies and gents. I hope you're having a wonderful day today, as per usual. And today I figured, based on the voting that I published on my YouTube channel, with regards to whether or not you guys want a Danish language review, most of you said yes. I think an overwhelming 96% or something out of like, how many votes? I think it was like maybe 25, 26, 27 people who voted on it in total. I figured why not do a little Danish language review, because I've been doing a lot on Swedish, and maybe I might do further videos on Norwegian, Icelandic, maybe the Finnish language, do like a little Nordic language review overall. And today it's going to be Danish, and it also has a particular reason for it, because I was just recently in Denmark about 2 months ago, and I got to experience the Danish culture, the Danish language, and all of that. And I figured why not? I'll give my personal opinion, my personal view on how that experience went with regards to the Danish language, and how maybe it compares to the Swedish language, how similar they are, how much I got to understand that language, how much I didn't understand, and so on and so forth. And just to give you a brief definition of the Danish language, as per usual, I like to just give a brief short definition of things, of the terminology before we continue the video. The Danish language is a Norse Germanic language. It's derived from the Old Norse, and to be even more precise, it's an Eastern Scandinavian language alongside with Swedish. And I think there's Western Scandinavian language, which is, or like a language group, which is more Norwegian and Icelandic, I suppose. And it's very similar to the Norwegian, because obviously Norwegian kind of came from the Danish, or it kind of derived from it, because Denmark used to reign over Norway for quite some time, and so on and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into the historical details now. And it's also very similar to the Swedish, so Swedish people can understand the Danish language and vice versa. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult for the Swedes to understand Danish rather than the other way around. I don't know for sure. Please let me know in the comment section down below. And I think I'll just start off with a few interesting, or a few observations, a few key studies that I kind of conducted in recent times. Just maybe like 3 or 4 things that I want to kind of elaborate or kind of talk about the Danish language in particular. And the first thing that is maybe known to quite a few people is that the Danish has a lot of thrusting sounds. And what do I mean by thrusting sounds? So the Danish is basically characterized by a unique prosodic feature called stud, and is like a O with a little line crossed, so to speak. Same thing in Norwegian, which means literally thrust. And it's also oftentimes described as a creaky sound. And to be honest, I don't really understand what it's meant by creaky sound. The best I can imagine is probably the fact that the Danes, when they speak their language, they often kind of use their throat a lot, kind of they swallow the words, or they kind of like kind of like this, in this kind of weird sound, or at least that was my observation, at least what I experienced personally, and maybe that's what is meant by thrust. Not entirely sure, but I can kind of understand where what is trying to, like, what the studies are trying to say. And what I personally experienced was also the fact that the written language of the Danish is to some degree understandable if you know Swedish, if you study Swedish, and you understand Swedish more or less, kind of on a basic fundamental level. But the speaking is obviously another type of situation where I personally could not really understand the people of Denmark whenever they tried to, or not that they tried to communicate in Danish with me, but if I was listening to another conversation in Danish, listening to people speak in their language, it was a very difficult situation for me to try to understand or try to pick out a few words, like I usually try to do, which is one of my main strategies, to kind of pick out a few essential key words in order to understand the whole sentence, or to understand the whole conversation more or less. And that was really, really tricky for me. And I have to say that for some reason Norwegian was a bit easier for me than the Danish. while actually I think the Norwegian and the Danish are more closely related to each other because of historical reasons, and the language is quite similar to some degree. Another interesting factor here is also, which I personally didn't know up until like maybe as of recent, was that the Danish language gained a new letter, which is the O. So the A was a little circle on top in 1948. And for example, in the past, the Danish language, they kind of had this letter, but they wrote it in a different way, which was just simply a double A. So like, for example, the city Aalborg or Aalborg, if I pronounce that correctly, Aalborg. Some names were kept that way for historical reasons, for traditional reasons. They didn't change. They didn't adapt to new words formations and so on and so forth. Some words were changed, I believe. Some words were adapted to it. But cities like Aalborg or names maybe that have a double A are still the way they are. And this is something that I found to be rather interesting. And also, I think for Danish and for German and Swedish and many other Germanic languages, I think the Danish language, it's very easy to create Danish words on the go. So what do I mean by that? It's kind of like if you want to describe a particular concept or a particular situation, you kind of mash in certain words in one big word. So for example, the one Danish word that I fished out was the langtidsplanlægge. That basically means long time planning, so to speak. So, and it's kind of similar in German, Langzeitplanung. And in German, it's actually to some degree even worse because we can literally like add, there are words that exist like maybe in this kind of length, so like over 50 letters or something like that in one go, and that can mean literally one thing. And I don't know how far the Danish language goes with that, but I know for sure that the Swedish is kind of similar with the Danish in that sense. And I'm not sure if it's only something particular or something unique to the Germanic languages, because in English, I haven't encountered any long words in English that are like this. I think it's more of a Danish, German, Swedish, maybe Dutch. I'm not sure about Dutch, to be honest, and so on and so forth. My personal experience of Denmark and the Danish language is the following. So overall, I like the country. It's a very beautiful country. It's very rich in history, a lot of historical museums, a lot of good stuff, great food, by the way. I like the food there. The sightseeing is beautiful as well. And that's only in Copenhagen or Copenhagen, if you pronounce it right. However, like I said before, it's very tough to understand the Danes verbally. As someone who's studying Swedish, it's definitely a challenge to understand. But the reading is easier in that sense because you can take more time to read the words. It's more understandable because you can kind of identify certain similarities with the Swedish language or with the Danish language, and so on and so forth. So reading menu cards wasn't that difficult, or reading certain instructions or certain signs or whatever it may be on the streets or whatever. It was more or less understandable. The question maybe you might be asking, is the Danish language my first preference? To be honest, I don't really know. Most likely not. I wouldn't go for Danish as like my first, it's not, I've never really thought of the Danish language before, really. I wasn't that interested, or I didn't really care to be interested in the Danish language to begin with. However, after studying Swedish, maybe I might consider studying Danish at some point. Most likely not, though, to be honest. I would probably still go for Danish, maybe, for Norwegian, probably. That's not sure if that's a Freudian slip, maybe not, who knows. But I think for me, I don't really know why, but I feel like the Norwegian language is to some degree a little easier. Maybe they simplified the language. I don't know. Maybe you guys can explain that. Maybe you guys let me know in the comment section down below. for some reason, if you study Swedish, if you know Swedish, then Norwegian is like literally a brotherly language to me. And I know this is maybe a false statement, because historically Danish and Norwegian are literally like this, two together. Swedish and Norwegian, not so much. I don't think so, not as far as I read or heard or whatever the case may be. So, but yeah, for some reason it's definitely easier to understand Norwegian. And I think I heard from someone that if you understand Norwegian, then you can understand Icelandic closer, because Norwegian and Icelandic are even closer together, or are very close together to some particular degree. You guys can also correct me on that if you want. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up the little Danish language review. Like I said, it's a very interesting language. A lot of similarities, but still not one-to-one literally, as with any other language, quite frankly speaking. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the Danish language. Any particular comments, reviews on that, any interesting facts about the Danish. Either ways, I hope you have a great day, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.